Hello, welcome back to Your Story Stinks, episode 6. So we've talked about comics, we've talked about manga, we've talked about movies. It's time to talk about television. Now, honestly, I could do probably an entire episode on any one season of any of the CW shows. Because, by and large, they're, how do I put this? I don't want to say cookie cutter, but a lot of them are flawed in all the same ways. So, when I talk about Supergirl, I'm not going to really talk about any one season or any one, particular episode or anything like that, because the show as a whole is deeply flawed in such a way that just bothers me, and I'll get into why. But it's flawed in a way that the other ones aren't. So, I'm just going to get into it. Let's just skip ahead and get into it. Here's the thing. All of the CW shows are written and produced by the same guy, in the sense that they all have different sub-writers, but there's one dude who works as the writer-producer and gets a writer and head producer credit on all of the shows. And so they all kind of feel very similar, with the exception of Legends, which is the only show that he's not in charge of. And that's probably why it's the only show that feels unique. The other thing is that he's also the head writer and producer of things like Riverdale, and he got his start writing for Dawson's Creek, so there's that. And this is all relevant because the thing about Supergirl that bugs me, and I'm not sure I've seen this a lot from anyone else's critiques, is that Supergirl feels like a television show for women written by men. So what do I mean by that? Well, it's not that men can't write women. It's not that men are incapable of writing good female characters. It's that there's a type of writing where men write women based on what they think women are like without actually bothering to try and write them as real people or characters. So, there are certain topics which tend to come up over and over in stuff like this, and there are certain things that are focused on which is immediately apparent if you're looking for it. So there's another version of this kind of theory in terms of women characters in movies, and I don't remember the name of the rule, but basically the rule is if all your female characters can do when they're not around men is talk about men, they're badly written. And I don't know what the name of the rule is, but there's a rule for this coined by someone, and it's true. But I also want to point out the fact that this goes back in television to, I want to say the 90s in terms of what I'm going to be talking about. And I think the first thing I remember seeing it in was Buffy the Vampire Slayer. So there's a lot of shows that claim to be progressive that aren't, where they take things that are not empowering and then claim that they are empowering. So in the 90s, the way they did this was you'd have all of these women who would be initially portrayed as being hardworking, job-focused, and all they needed was to find the right guy. And the right guy is always a dude who is not put together, who is a complete failure, who utterly can't do anything on his own, and just kind of he's the worst, basically. But somehow this woman who is all focused and cold just opens up her heart to them, and she finds love with him. She just needed to learn how to be loved. like that, like that's Buffy the Vampire Slayer, is like a woman who ostensibly is doing progressive things, meaning that she's the protagonist and killing monsters, but then they spend an inordinate amount of time of the show writing about her emotional problems and her boy problems, where she's in a will they, won't they romance, and it's indistinguishable from what comes before. But, oh, you know, she's killing monsters and yells a lot, so clearly that means it's progressive, right? Like, it's progressive on the surface without actually changing anything. It takes a whole lot of ideas which are extremely regressive and then just calls them progressive without actually making them progressive. I'm not sure if that makes a whole lot of sense, but I'll explain more when I start listing the things that Supergirl does that makes me think this way. Because it's immediately obvious to me that the people who are writing Supergirl are not entirely sure how to write a progressive modern woman without falling back on tropes and ideas that are backwards. That doesn't mean it doesn't have good action. That doesn't mean that it doesn't have good moments. That doesn't mean there aren't good things about it. But the problem is that a lot of the show is taken up by things that don't belong. Because the show is working against itself. Like, on one side, you have writers who are clearly like, okay, we're going to write a progressive female character who takes no shit and is morally forward and is unwilling to take other people's crap. And then you have writers who are like, actually, we're going to spend a whole lot of time with all of these female characters making the glassy-eyed, I look like I'm about to cry face as they talk about emotions and feelings about things that comes off like a guy thinks this is how women talk about their feelings. I'm not sure the writers understand that women can talk about their feelings without constantly making the emotional I'm about to cry face. And if you just pause if you take any scene in this show where women are talking about anything serious, they're all making the same face. They're all making the same glassy eyes, about to cry, like pouty upper lip, unhappy face. And they're all doing the same one. It's like they all have the same acting coach, and they might. But it's extremely weird to have that be the tone when you're also trying to portray these people as being like hardcore, serious badasses. Because this is not how you write this is not how they write any of the men. I should point out, by the way, that the men's shows are not any better in a lot of ways. Like Arrow is not any better than this in the sense that they only understand how to write two archetypes. They understand how to write women doing serious, almost about to cry face, and men doing the stoic, I don't react to anything face, or angry and yelling for no reason face. And always that's all Arrow boils down to, is like Green Arrow looking fucking angry and stoic off to the side while everyone else looks concerned. There's a lot of like concerned face going on in this show, speaking of. But another reason I say that it feels like a show about women written by dudes is that when it comes time to like write character development, like not write action scenes, not write comic book scenes, when it's time to write like character development scenes, they always fall back on these tropes which are bizarre to see contrasted with everything else. So like, for example, every time the women all get together, they're all drinking wine, because that's what women do, right? They get together and drink wine and talk about their feelings. that's what women do, right? Apparently, like, that's what it kind of what I mean when I say it's like a man who knows nothing about women, whose only knowledge about what women are like and how they interact with anyone is based around, like, television. Like, because that's what women do when they're sad. They all drink wine and talk about their feelings together. And they all look like they're almost about to cry for some reason. There's a whole lot of, like, scenes about kids. Because that's what also women are all about, right? They're biological clocks. All the women need to, like, constantly think about children, because we can't have any of our protagonists have children, because that would imply that any of them are having sex or thinking about deep relationships or, like, being serious and emotional, and it would require, like, actual maturity, and it would require a whole lot of, like, work and effort that the writers are incapable of doing. So instead, and this is another thing from Arrow, by the way, that they copy paste, is introducing a character who already has a child who is of acting age, basically, of, like, elementary, middle school age. And, like, all of a sudden, all of the girls are acting like stand-in mothers. Basically, like, oh, all of a sudden we need scenes where all of the women go to, like, school plays for this child who is, like, the kid of their friend and act like mother figures and shit. And it's like, this feels very weird. Like, another thing is, like, they need to break up the lesbian couple. So what do they break them up over? Kids. Is this handled well? No, it's not. Like, the only reason they could think of, how do we break up this lesbian couple? Well, one of them wants to get pregnant and have a child, and the other one doesn't. Do they realize that, like, there are other ways to handle this? Oh, by the way, the lesbian sister is an alcoholic, because of course, when we write a lesbian, we can only write her as a job-focused, unhappy alcoholic who also wants to be a mother, but can't. Is it just, like, I don't know how, like, I'm not sure how to convey how bad that idea is a writing, like, how regressive that writing idea is. Like, I don't know how to explain this, because it feels obvious when you say it. You're like, oh, that's the character arc we're going with, are we? I'm pretty sure I've seen this before. In fact, I think I've seen this in everything from the last, like, I don't know, 40 years. It feels like it'd be, like, in every other media. Like, it's like there's just so much of this that comes off wrong. Another plot that comes up is, like, oh, one of them is being forced into a forced marriage by an alien. And, oh, there's an evil mother-in-law, because that's what women worry about, right? Evil mother-in-laws? Like, it should be kind of obvious that this is kind of weird. That this kind of feels weird. Because on the surface, they portray all this stuff as being, like, progressive, and there's a lot of political undertones, and I'm not really concerned about that, because like, having shows be about politics is not new or revolutionary, and so it really doesn't matter all that much in terms of, like, my critiques. Like, whatever political messages they want to get out, whatever, that's fine. The weird thing, the thing that constantly keeps, like, irking me is that the way they're writing these characters feels wrong. It feels regressive to me. It feels like guys who don't know what women do and their need to introduce problems that are based in, like, 90s sitcom tropes. So, like, for example, in season 2, I think, they introduce Lena, and credit to this actress because she's not bad. It's just she is, in my opinion, kind of miscast. Because I'm not necessarily because she's bad at the role, but because the writers don't know what to do with her. Like, they can't decide if she's evil, like if she's the evil betrayer who is fitting the Lex Luthor job, and then they're like, okay, no, she's actually a good person and friends of the rest of the cast, and it's like, okay, but if that's the case, why do you constantly have all the other characters act like they don't trust her? And it goes on beyond the point, but that's later. The first problem you have is that you introduce her, and then I think the writers got worried that the fandom or the viewers were going to think that she and Supergirl were going to be lesbians together, and they hyper corrected because in the next season, all of a sudden, they spend an inordinate amount of time on Lena and her boyfriend and Kara and her boyfriend, and they have all these scenes of them apart where they constantly fight, because that's what people in relationships do, right? They fight all the time. That's all they can do. When you're in a relationship, all you do is constantly go between being unhappy and then making out. Like, that's what, like, there are scenes where, like, Lena and James Olsen, I think it is, and they're sitting down drinking wine, of course, and they start talking about super serious stuff and making the pouty faces, and then transition to making out. Or they will cut an inordinate amount of time and effort of them and their relationship problems. And it's like, why? Like, because it's never, like, good relationship problems. They just keep relitigating the same stuff over and over again. It feels like they hyper-corrected. It feels like the writers were looking at the audience, and the audience was getting an idea, and then the writers just panicked and felt like they needed to hyper-correct. And it doesn't help that they filmed the show in the most, how do I put this? I don't want to say homoerotic way possible, but okay, let me explain. So in film, in television, movies, whatever, when you shoot footage, there's ways for you to do it to convey certain ideas. So if you want a scene to look like, you want a character to look imposing, or you want to convey seriousness, you film it one way. If you want to film something romantically, you shoot it another way. If you want to convey closeness or hostility, you shoot them in different ways. There are different ways to structure shots to convey things to the audience subconsciously. And most of the time, you don't notice it unless unless something feels off, or unless things are being relayed that don't match up. So, for example, if you shot a horror scene the same way you shot a romance, it would be weird, because you would have the way you're shooting it contrasted with the actions that don't make sense. It's weird when you film something where you have it's weird when you have footage. It's like weird when you have, like, seriousness contrasted with a way of shooting that undermines it. And one thing you notice when you go back and look at lots of Supergirl scenes and how they're shot like it's a romance, almost. Like, they're shot in such a way that it makes it look like romantic, almost, where they're trying to, like... So they film a lot of these shots where, like, they love this kind of dynamic where they shoot all the characters from below and they zoom in. So they, like, shoot slightly, so the camera is slightly looking up at them, basically. And it's weird because they also do this thing where they shoot footage, and they love the shot of, like, one character is standing in front of the other and the one's talking from behind them. They shoot it like it's Casablanca, basically. Like, everyone knows that one shot of Casablanca where I think he's standing in front of her and she's in the doorway and she's talking to his back and he's, like, slightly looking behind wistfully. They shoot so many scenes like this. It's really odd. it's really odd, and you get the sense, like, it feels like what they're intending is, like, okay, we're trying to convey that these two women are going to be a couple, that they are going to fall in love, because that's what the filming seems like it's conveying. It seems like that's what the film is conveying. It seems like that's what the editors and that's what the directors are trying to convey to you, that these two characters are getting closer. Like, that's how you shoot this. Like, that's how you shoot these. That's how you score them. That's how you write them. Like, that's how it feels. And then they just constantly don't do that, so you end up with weird mixed signals through the entire show. And it's bizarre. It's just because if you're not intending to do that, if you do not intend to have these two characters come together and be a couple, don't film them the same way that you film the actual lesbian couple on your show, because they do. That's actually, now that I think about it, that's a good comparison, because there's an actual lesbian couple through seasons of this show, and they film friends and lovers the same way, and it's weird. Speaking of a little bit of weirdness when we talk about this show, this also comes down to men, like the feels like it's written by guys thing, where they can't imagine women being friends. They can only imagine women either being lesbians or catty. And if that sounds sexist, it is, because it feels sexist when you watch the show. Like, again, it feels like so much of the time they feel the need to introduce pointless drama to try and convey to the audience that these women are not in love, no matter how we shoot them and no matter how many times they come together and talk about their feelings. Because the writers can't, the writers and the director can't seem to, like, decide, like, because that's the only way these guys can figure out how to write women. They're like, well, either they're in love and they're lesbians, or they have to be catty to one another so we can convey to the audience that they don't like each other, which doesn't make any sense, and it doesn't work. So there's lots of scenes where Supergirl and Lena will just be catty to one another for no reason except to create pointless drama. And again, it feels like Riverdale. Unsurprisingly, the same guy is the producer on that show too, and it feels that way. Of course, the guy also directed Green Lantern, the movie, so that's the guy whose hands we're in. You know, the guy does not understand how to write emotional scenes correctly, or at least not serious ones. I mean, I could talk forever about Arrow and all the emotional problems of trying to write that show, but we're not talking about that right now. That's a different episode. It's a different episode. Instead, we're still talking about Supergirl and all of the weird sexism that seems to be pervasive throughout the series. I mean, like, because this is what I mean. Like, it feels like there's two sets of writers. It feels like there's the writers who handle the comic book action scene stuff, and those ones are convinced that, yeah, we're writing a super progressive show, we're writing a strong female character who is independent and doesn't need anyone. And then there are the writers who are writing everything else who are convinced that no, Supergirl is actually super emotional and super vulnerable because she's a woman, and so she needs to be vulnerable and emotional about everything. It doesn't work, and it's weird. Okay? It feels like we have two sets of characters. Like two sets of writers for the same show. Now, speaking of all of this, I've kind of gotten away from talking about Supergirl herself, and that's because... okay. I'm just gonna have to, like, dive into this one, I guess. So, here's the thing. One thing that's really weird about this show is that they bring Superman in as a character, which I guess you kind of have to. And that's fine. But one thing that people who don't write Superman well do is that they don't understand the crux of the character. What I mean by that is that Superman is at his best when he's a symbol. So what I mean is he isn't forcing his beliefs on other people. He lives his beliefs. So, for example, the dynamic with well-written Superman is so powerful that if he wanted to, he could be an absolute dick and no one would be able to stop him. And yet, he chooses to be good. Okay? That's the dynamic. So, the way you write Superman well is you have Superman being beset by villains who are choosing to be evil. So almost all of Superman's villains are people who are willingly doing evil despite the fact that they don't need to. So like Lex Luthor doesn't have to be an asshole. He just is, you know. Toyman, Metallo, Darkseid, Mongol. These are people who, by and large, willingly choose to be evil as a contrast to Superman. Because Superman, it doesn't force other people to believe what he believes. That's why you get all those evil Superman takes. That's when you get like the Injustice Superman of a Superman who believes that actually he should use his power to force everyone to believe like he does. Real Superman doesn't need to do that. Real Superman is like, you should be a good person. You should be kind. I will do everything in my power to help people if you're in need, but I'm not going to make you do bad. I'm not going to make you believe the way I believe. He doesn't proselytize. The worst kinds of Supermen are written where you write a Superman who believes that actually he should be making moral speeches to everybody because he's so much better than everyone. That's when you get writers who think that Superman's best quality is that he needs to be a paragon who preaches. And it's the worst. It's like, that's the worst kind of Superman. It's to use a movie analogy, it's the Superman 4 problem, where in Superman 4 you have a Superman who's like, if people wanted peace, they would have it. And it's like, no, that's like, where do you get off? Because it's like, yeah, you can make this choice. You don't have to ever worry about anything. You don't have to worry, like, if you want something, you can just take it, man. If you want to be evil, you could be. So, you proselytizing to other people who have less comes off as tone-deaf and pointless. So, what does this have to do with Supergirl? Well, the writers of Supergirl have decided that she needs to embody the worst parts of everything I've just said, on top of being pointlessly emotional. Now, caveat. There's nothing wrong with women being emotional, okay? I'm not one of those people who's like, actually, in order to not be sexist, you need to like write women as not having emotions. That's not the problem, okay? That's not the issue. The issue is that the writers think that writing a female character who is emotional to the point where she constantly lashes out at everybody else for not living up to the standards she sets for herself or anybody else, combined with the moral indignation of the worst kinds of Superman, makes for a good character. And it doesn't. Okay, this is what I mean when I say it feels like two sets of writers, because there's one set of writers who writes all the comic book things, and Supergirl's out there, like, defending people and sacrificing herself and doing good, and you're like, wow, this is great. This is perfect. This is wonderful. And then you have another set of writers who are like, actually, what we need to do is take Supergirl and have her constantly complain at everybody and start fights with people about how unfair everything is and constantly assume the worst. This is where I get back into the whole being catty for no reason thing. Okay? Because she constantly makes assumptions about other people. People who are her friends. Like, she assumes that people are doing bad things and are working for their own interests, even when there's no reason. So, like, the Supergirl-Lena relationship is weird, because, like, there's a scene where Lena is working with their mutual friend who has the kid, and it turns out actually they're a world killer from Krypton, and they have this alternate personality that activates, that goes around and wants to kill everything. And so, you know, Lena, like, she's there with Lena and being like, hey, I'm dangerous and I don't want to hurt, you know, my kid, and I don't want to hurt anybody else, so I need you to, like, help me. And Lena's like, okay, I'm gonna help you. And they're working privately in their lab, and then Supergirl shows up and is like, do you understand? Like, what are you doing? Why? I can't believe this. Like, flying off the handle, being like, why are you locking her in prison? Why are you, like, using kryptonite? Do you have any idea what that feels like? Like, and it's like, of course, the person who asked for all this can't, like, tell them what's going on, because suddenly world killer attack and, you know, suddenly they're another personality. And it's like, this is somebody that she's supposedly, like, best friends with, and she just, like, assumes that, like, oh, you've gone full supervillain now because I've seen one thing out of context. And it's like, it's really hard to have a character that's constantly like, people should believe in me, I need to be a symbol, while also never believing in anyone else and constantly assuming the worst of them, and constantly kind of, like, demanding that other people meet her standards and stuff. It's weird, because, again, it feels like when the good writers are writing, she's not like this, and then when the bad writers are writing, it feels like the writers feel the need to introduce cattiness so that there's constant conflict and tension, like it's Riverdale. You can tell I don't particularly like the Riverdale all that much. It's because it's a completely different kind of show, and it doesn't belong in a superhero show. You could write a superhero show where everybody is, like, where it's less of a superhero show and more like a sitcom or more like a drama. But Supergirl is neither of those. And so it all kind of feels disjointed. And it's not helpful when the rest of the stuff that feels sexist is paired with this, because it feels like their idea of what a strong woman is like is the kind of... How do I put this? Again, this feels like men writing women, where they're like, okay, what does a strong man look like? And their idea of a strong man is the guy who berates everybody and screams a lot. And they're like, okay, what's the female equivalent of that? And that's how they write Supergirl. And it's just not good. It's hard to watch in some points. It gets very annoying really quickly. Now, it feels... It's tiring more than anything, because there's a I don't want to bring too much comics knowledge into this, because the comics are different, obviously. And while the shows draw on comics, They usually don't just take things directly, because comics are often really stupid and have stupid ideas. But Supergirl in the comics is a lot of things, but she's not her cousin. In fact, that's like one of the main parts of her, is that she's angry, and she's like she's angry, she's forward, she's direct, she doesn't take any shit. She was a Red Lantern at one point, powered by her anger. Like, her whole concept, like, her whole story is that myself and my cousin were both sent to Earth at the same time. And my ship got knocked off course. And his ship arrived before mine, and now he's older than me. When we left, he was a baby. And now we're back, and he's older than me. And my entire mission for being here is like, lost. More than that, like, it's a fish out of water story, where it's kind of like, you know, to him, Krypton's barely a memory. He doesn't have any memories, really, of his home planet. Kara has lots and lots of memories of her parents, of her whole, like, her family life, of things that she used to love and enjoy that are now all gone and are all still fresh. But they just, like, throw all that out, and they're like, okay, new background. She came here as a child, and you know, she grew up on Earth, so she's basically the same as the Superman origin. But with the comics, it kind of makes sense that she has this emotional volatility, because grief is still raw. Like, all of her feelings of being powerless and helpless, and her inability to save her people, and all of these, like, her being on a planet that she doesn't really relate to the same way that her cousin does, like, makes for good stories. It makes for a unique character. The problem with this Kara is that they're taking all of that emotional volatility, and they're applying it to a character where it doesn't seem to fit, basically. Because she doesn't, like, they're both being like, yeah, actually, she was a young girl when she came to Earth, but also she has all of these feelings of things that don't make sense for someone who could probably barely remember her home for the most part. And it just doesn't work. I think at this point, there's only one thing left to talk about. And that is the fashion of this show. How do I put this? So, it bleeds into all of the CW shows, but it extremely bleeds into this one, where it got so bad that the cast started commenting on it. So I feel like I kind of need to, too. I'm going to critique the show, which is that all of the women are dressed in this show like they're constantly nobody dresses like a normal person in this show. Every woman in this show dresses like they're going for a fashion shoot. like they're models. It's weird. It's very weird, because like it all feels kind of like they did wardrobe for this show like they were doing one of those, I guess I'm showing my age, like those Tumblr collages of like outfits, or they're doing like Instagram like outfit of the day posts. Everyone is dressed like this. It's really bad with Kara, who often feels like she's being dressed like 1950s chic. But everyone else is just as bad. Alex is really bad, because it's like, oh, she's a lesbian, so we can dress. So half the time she's dressed like it's like it's like they're like, okay, what do lesbians wear? And that's how they they don't approach it from, what do women wear, and what would a person like her enjoy? No, it's like, what does the identity we're trying to fill wear? look up a bunch of posts on Instagram, dress them like that. Lena is also bad. Her actress spoke out about this, where, like, she's meant to be a scientist, and like, she's constantly dressed like she's going out to, like, an evening dinner ball or something. Like, she's wearing fucking evening gowns and shit, and it's like, you're a scientist. Never mind the fact that, speaking of which, her character is all over the place. And this also is why I also kind of feel like it's written by men who don't understand women in power and who want to do things that aren't talking. Like, I don't mean that that's a bad thing. I mean that, like, the show seems to think that that's all women can do. It's weird. So, like, for example, when Lena's introduced, she's like girl boss. She's like, I started my own company. I'm a scientist. I'm brilliant. And then the season after that, they're like, actually, instead of being like CEO and scientist woman, she's now head of a media empire, because that's what women do, right? They head up tabloid newspaper industries. And it's like, why? There's no reason to make this change. There's no reason for this other than the fact that they can't think of anything else for anyone to do except be reporters because they're not creative. It's like, well, Superman was a reporter, so clearly that means Kara also needs to be a reporter. But it's kind of like, well, it worked in season 1 because the character of Cat Grant is probably the closest thing to a great character this show ever made. Okay, and that's probably because, I don't have any proof of this, but it feels like the actress, who again was an Ally McBeal, like, was it Calissa Flockhart, I think her name is? Like, she owns every scene she's in. She understands exactly what she needs to be. She understands exactly what tone she needs to be. And her character works for, like, the fashionista thing. Like, her character is nearly perfect. The only other character who comes nearly close to her is Lillian Luthor, because she also knows exactly what she needs to be, and she plays the role perfectly. But the other thing that makes them work is that neither of them are playing into the stupid bullshit that all the other characters have to be written into. Like, all the weirdness that I've talked about so far does not affect these two characters. I don't know if that's because they had more control over their characters, or just because the people who were writing them were better at their jobs. I don't know. All I know is that both of them avoid all of the problems I've basically talked about so far, because they're written as close to what, like, Supergirl and Lena respectively should be. Like, their characters, their way of being, their way they present themselves, the way in which they have moral beliefs, and their desire to do things in the world, and their desire to make what they want to have happen a reality. All of that is decoupled from all the stupid bullcrap that I've talked about with the terrible writers so far. It's a little weird. Because, again, there are lots of shows that have written strong female characters with emotions that don't constantly feel like caricatures, almost. Like, again, a bunch of guys sitting down and being like, what do women act and talk like? How do we write that? And their solution was this. And honestly, once you start to see it, you never unsee it. And it's not even like unknown in the other CW shows. Arrow had this problem for a very long time. And Flash also has this problem. Flash incredibly is all over the place with its female characters, specifically Iris, whose character fluctuates between damsel and badass depending on the episode, because the writers can't decide what kind of character she is. It's it feels the same way with Supergirl, just much worse because most of the characters are women, and ostensibly it's trying to be like a female empowerment show, but it doesn't understand what female empowerment looks like, or what kinds of female empowerment, like it doesn't understand how to empower women, so it can't write women who feel empowered or look empowered or act empowered. It just knows how to write women the way women have been written forever, and just does the same thing and claims that it's changing things when it's not. You change the coat of paint, but it's going from like it's like if you took like bright white and you changed it and repainted everything eggshell white and you claimed it was a different color. It's like, no, it's still white. Still not good. Now, I mean, there are good, like I said, there are good parts, but it's just a lot of like things that don't mesh fitting together. It's a lot of like it's a lot of stupidity is what I guess what it boils down to. It's a lot of unforced errors. Like, no one was making them write this show this way. No one was like, yeah, you know what we need? We need a character who constantly pontificates about politics, but who is also someone who undermines and doesn't trust everybody around them. So she comes off like as the villain almost in a lot of scenes, which is weird. Oh, okay, never mind. One last thing that I gotta talk about, because this is like perhaps like the biggest indication of we don't know how to write female relationships that are not like lesbians or catty. So a running subplot in this show is that Kara doesn't tell anyone like who she is except for everyone. So like everybody in the main cast knows that she is who she is, and knows that she's Supergirl, knows that she's who she is, except Lena. And they do this thing where like there are scenes where Lena and Supergirl will have arguments over things. Like they will like argue with each other, and then they will split off, and Lena will go see Kara, and Kara will act like her best friend, knowing that she literally just had a fight with her 10 minutes ago. like 10 minutes ago they were fighting, and then Kara puts on some glasses and acts like she's best friends with this woman. And it's like, that's some like two-faced shit. That is some like horribly manipulative. That this woman has a personal work relationship with a person of two identities. Like, I have one personal relationship with you. I have a personal work relationship with you as your hero self, and I have a personal and work relationship with you where you're my best friend, and I don't know that you are the same person. So I will have a fight with you as Supergirl, and then I will go over to your home not knowing that I just had a fight with you and confide in you about emotional things. That is not a good look. That is not a good look for your protagonist of the series. Like you can't be having deep emotional scenes between two characters while also having those two characters fight while one of them acts like they're two different people. It just doesn't work. At all. I think what they're trying to go for is the Superman Lois Lane thing, where supposedly Lois doesn't know that he's Superman. But the thing is that doesn't work if you're not trying to make a relationship out of it. If you're not trying to write them as in a romance, why are you doing this? More importantly, one thing that they almost always do with Superman and Lois is that once Lois and Superman start getting involved, by which I mean that once Superman realizes he wants to go further with her and become a thing, he reveals his identity to her. Like that's a common thing of the mythos of like, as soon as he goes, okay, I am Clark Kent, but you and me are having a relationship where I am Superman, he almost always reveals the fact that he is also Clark Kent to her. Okay? That's like one of the that's one of the things that they do. That's like one of the main things is like he realizes, okay, I can't lie to you. I can't have a relationship with you and lie to you. You know? And Kara has this same scene. Like they almost shot for shot remake this same scene in season 1 between Kara and Winn, where she's like, I'm Supergirl, and walks off a building and freaks him out, and she comes back up flying, going, haha, see, I can fly, it's proof. Like, that's a shot, that's like exactly from Superman 1, where he just walks off the building. And he's like, surprise, I can fly. Like, but why would you, like, you can't do that. You can't do this with a character, like, it's so weird to have a character who is involved in like the inner circle with aliens and superhero stuff, and yet Kara and everyone else are just lying about their knowledge of what's going on. Like, Lena's the only one who doesn't get put in the loop for reasons that are never really made clear because she constantly helps out the team. You know, it would be like in Flash if they had the whole team together and they just didn't tell, like, Caitlin that Barry and Flash were the same person. It wouldn't work, because it'd be weird. They're like, oh, I'm the Flash, and I'm part of Team Flash just like you, and then I go home and everybody acts like I'm not the Flash. Like, it's weird. It's weird and it's bizarre. And it feels like it's injected in there to create drama where drama does not need to exist. It feels like they don't know what to do, so they just need to make, like, tension where there is none. And again, this is where, like, Legends is a much better show written by much better people who understand how to write women correctly, where they can be multiple things and have emotions and also be awesome and, you know, talk about things without coming off weird constantly, and you don't shoot the show in ways that are, you know, you don't shoot the show in ways that work against your entire premise, I guess, is what I'm trying to get at. Like, honestly, I didn't think this, like, looking now, I'm surprised this has gone on for so long, because I didn't realize I had this much to talk about. I was like, I thought I could sum it all up, and yeah, it's a show about women written by dudes whose idea of women is everything you've seen out of women-centric shows for the last 40 years, except with a completely different set of writers, it feels like, for all the superhero bits. And it's sad, because I really like to see, you know, it's not like this is a case of bad acting. It's not a case of, like, the actors not doing well at their roles. It's not a case where the show is being let down by its special effects. It's not a case of, like there's so much that could have been better, because the writing is often so spotty and all over the place. In some ways, I think it may have been better if instead of writing Supergirl, they wrote Power Girl, because Power Girl is a very is a lot of the traits they give Kara taken up to 11. Like, she's unabashedly a woman. She takes no shit. She does not give one, like, she does not care if you think anything, whatever you think. Like, she does not care about you, about your thoughts. She is herself, and she is like she is everything that I think they would want Supergirl to be, but they aren't capable of writing. Like, like the whole debate about, like, okay, here's a good debate about what will kind of emphasize the kind of confusion of the show. The whole skirt versus pants thing. They can't the show can't make a statement one way or the other because it can't decide what it wants to be. It can't decide if, oh, she's a woman and she can make her own decisions, that's why she chooses to wear the skirt. Or she's a woman and she can make her own decisions, that's why she chooses to wear the pants. Like, it can't decide if she's liberated or oppressed, and so it can't make a statement because it can't make a decision. When reality is that neither is one way or the other. Like, the way in which you do this to be, she's her own person and she can do whatever she wants, and the fact that you feel the need to define her one way or the other based on her clothing is incredibly sexist, and you're only feeding into the sexism. Like, it doesn't matter which she's wearing. It doesn't matter because it's not about that. It's about her actions and what she does and what she chooses. But the show can't move beyond, like, old tropes. It can't move beyond that. The writers can't imagine defining a woman based on things like actions and beliefs. It can only, like, define them based around, like, public perception around what, like, clothing they wear. It's horribly disappointing. And honestly, I can't think of anything else to talk about now. It's just disappointing, and the story stinks. Like, so many of this could have been so much better if they just let the writers who wrote the superhero parts write the rest of the show. And didn't, like, constantly feel the need to turn it into Riverdale or turn it into every other CW show. Like, yeah, they just didn't do that. They just let women, like, if they found more women writers to write women the way women actually are, you'd probably end up with a better show. Anyway, the story stinks. See y'all later.